Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. Glad I get to be after lunch where you guys are all nice and warm now and ready to go to sleep. But we'll go along. My name is Mark Layton. I'm with Kickapoo Drilling Company. We're right here in central Illinois. I may actually win for the shortest speaker that had to drive here. I only live about 40 miles away. We drill mostly here in central Illinois, sands, gravels, clays, glacial tills. Mostly use mud rotary drilling processes, things like that. We've been around for over 60 years, third generation. My grandfather started it, and my father currently runs it, and I'm basically taking over at this point in time as he's getting ready to go ahead and retire. Been in the industry for over 20 years. I hold 2 state licenses, 2 NGWA certifications, and 1 International Ground Source Heat Pump accreditation. I'm also an active board member on the Illinois Association of Groundwater Professionals and the founding board member of the Geothermal Alliance of Illinois. Topics for today, they asked me to kind of talk about something that was kind of near and dear to my heart. And the thing that we always talk about in our industry, especially, is that 20 years ago, we never had as many bad coliform tests as we do now. And we cannot figure out for the life of us what has changed, because we still build wells and construct wells a lot the same that we did back then. We haven't changed that many procedures and methods. In fact, we got ahead of the curve of a lot of stuff when it came to grouting in wells and things. We saw the handwriting on the wall. We were ahead of grouting regulations when it came time to do that. We had already had the grout machines and been pressure grouting in our state for many years before it became an actual law, because we saw that that was coming down the line. But through that, the total coliform testing and treatment, like I said, we're seeing a lot more issues and a lot more problems throughout the years that we did not used to have. So that's kind of why I want to talk about this here today. These are my talk and my opinions. They are my own. It's my little disclaimer here that I'm not exactly what you call an expert. I am a water well driller by trade, but these are the things that I do. This is what works for me, and this is what I've seen work in the field. We've gone from doing one of these tests maybe a month, where it was kind of a nuisance, where we had to do this every now and then. It was like, why do we got to devote a guy in a truck to go do this? To now I have an office lady that does nothing but this. She schedules it with all the homeowners, with the realtors and things like that, gets it go ahead where she figures out who's going to be there, who's going to open it up, who's going to pay the bills, who's going to do this. And then we even now have our lab stop by our office about 3 times a week, Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. Most of these lab results have to be back in within 24 hours. We don't like to do Thursdays and Fridays, because Thursdays, if they don't get to it by Friday, then they wait till Monday, and now you got to go back and do another one. So we have them actually stop by and pick up samples 3 times a week from our office. We've seen homeowners, realtors, home inspectors, and even sanitarians and health department people that have not had the proper training to go ahead and take these tests, and we've seen those positive tests increase. I'll talk about some of the things that they do wrong, some of the things that we do right, as we kind of go through this. Our first sample, say that you're going to go out there, you've now been requested, or someone, the customer or someone has called you up and said, yes, we'd like to go ahead and have a sample. I like to place a softener on bypass if they're using a current water softener. The reason for that is because most water softeners near the top of them have what they call a freeboard space, or an air pocket within them. That likes to hold on to bacteria, and you find that most softening resins and the mineral that's inside them cannot be chlorinated and cannot be properly disinfected. So therefore, if you're trying to get an actual sample to say whether or not the well or the source is contaminated, running it through a softener is going to give you kind of a skewed result. This picture here, where it says the sample type raw, where it comes right in through the wall, you see it's got I like to call that the smooth nose sampling port. Our state requires that, which I think is a very good thing to have. Right as we come through or penetrate the wall, wherever the pressure tank is, we have to have a smooth nose sample port. It has to not have any threads on it. It needs to be 18 inches above ground. This is kind of a strange thing, but that's because they want to be able to stick a bucket underneath of it to catch any type of splashes in water. But whoever came up with that code was thinking at that point in time. But it allows you to go ahead and get a sample right there and kind of break the system down between the distribution and the actual source itself. The problem that we have in this state is they never actually required the sanitarians and the people that have to go and take the samples to take it from that particular smooth nose sample port. So most of them still go and take it from the kitchen sink, because they'd like to see the point of distribution, or the point inside the house that you're going to be drinking from, the point of use. So I educate a lot of my local sanitarians, a lot of my local health department department people to try to take both, take one from the sampling port and one from the distribution, and that way we can kind of see more than likely where the contamination is coming from if there is. Flush each line. This is one thing that I kind of talk about. Inside, outside. Your outside spigots are just as important as your inside spigots. If you have a yard hydrant that's way out there, you consider that to be a dead end. Dead ends are notoriously bad for holding on to bacteria and hiding that bacteria in those lines. You got to flush it to scour those lines, and as we go through, and later on we'll talk about chlorination, as we go to chlorinate, we've got to get chlorine down into those individual spots in those lines. We don't want to miss a single one. So there's no one spot that you want to not flush through the system. Do not take from a threaded connection. I think this one's from the state of Washington. If you read through all the step 1, step 2, everything is actually good, but I hate the pictures. I cringe every time I see that because it's an outside spigot with a threaded connection. And 9.999 out of 10, you're gonna have a contamination problem with that particular type of spigot. The only time I'll ever take one from a threaded type of spigot like that is if I have no other option to take it from anywhere else. That's the only time I'll ever do that. Back to where we're talking about that first sample. I like to find a sink, mop sink a lot of times with a removable aerator, or better yet, what we talked about, that smooth nose sampling port. I like to remove the aerator with the alcohol wipes, disinfect the threads, and the discharge of the faucet. I'll also at that point in time use the alcohol wipes to clean my fingers. The chicken that I ate for lunch that day does not belong in that sample bottle. I've tried to use gloves, rubber gloves and things like that, that you can buy. And I've had good samples and I've had bad samples, so I really don't believe that you need more than just the alcohol wipes, because I've not seen a difference between wearing gloves and not wearing gloves. Running the water to high enough flow. You want to run that for a couple minutes at high enough flow to get that faucet flush, but you don't want to run it high enough to splash water everywhere. You don't want to have water basically contaminating and splashed everywhere within the point that you're trying to sample. You want to go ahead and slow that water down to a pencil-sized stream. The types of samples and things that you're looking for, you don't want to have leaks coming out of your faucets. You don't want to have threads on your faucets. You don't want to have aerators on your faucets. You want a good, nice stream coming out of that one down there to the right with the little man just saying A-OK. The next steps are very important. These are things that we've learned from the field. Hold your breath. If you're breathing on the sample, you're contaminating the sample. It's just that simple. I have seen health department people standing there chewing gum with their mouth open while they take a sample, and I've been looking at them like, do you even know what you're doing? But that does happen. Don't breathe on or near the bottle. When you uncap the bottle, you want to do it away from the stream of water and then bring the bottle to the stream. When you go ahead and you want to hold the cap, you want to hold the cap not upwards, you want to hold it downwards. You don't want to allow any splashes, splatters, or anything that into that cap. You do not want to hold that cap like that. When you unscrew it, keep it in a downward orientation. You want to place the bottle into the stream as neatly as possible, and you want to fill to that indicator line. And then you want to pull the bottle out right away. You do not want to take the bottle, pull it out, put it to your face, look at it a few times, say, no, that's not enough, and put it back 3 or 4 times. Don't do that. You put it in, you pull it out, you immediately go ahead and you cap that bottle. Don't mess around with it. You want to get it right the first time and place it on there. Then go ahead and remember to breathe again, and if you have the softener offline, go ahead and put it back online. Alaska, this is from Alaska's website for their sampling, and other than the flushing and stuff that I talk about on trying to flush, and we'll talk more into that when we talk about bad samples, they get it mostly right, where they talk about even down to the point of sample error, where it talks there on the right-hand side. It says sometimes water samples fail total coliform because of sampling error, not because the water system is actually contaminated. To ensure that does not happen, follow these steps to take a coliform sample from your water. I like that they've actually included that you know what, sometimes you're going to have low problems. We get a lot of what I call nuisance ones, where they're 1, 2 counts, things like that over and over again, and our state requires it to be less than 1. We never have figured out yet how you can have less than 1, because there's half a bacteria is hard to get, but they say we have to have less than 1, so we're going with that. They also talk about to remember that you have to be within the lab within so many hours. You can tell it's Alaska because they talk about if you're in a remote area, you got to have a flight. But for the most part, I like what they've done with that particular slide on that. Let's say if your test comes back bad, and bad I mean that you have a positive count of bacteria. We don't have a mascot for Coliform bacteria, we have crypti. If anybody's a fan of satire, The Onion, National Satire magazine, did an article back in 2000 where they talked about this town in Georgia, Blakely, Georgia, and it was 1988. They had a cryptosporidium outbreak where 611 people got sick. The Onion ran a thing on saying the next year they had cryptosporidium days where they had everybody come by and they'd Crypti the mascot, T-shirts were made up. No one attended for some odd reason, but I've always kind of thought that was funny that cryptosporidium has a mascot, and we need one for coliform. Do not, if you get a bad result, accept a pass-fail test. A lot of labs are going to give you a pass-fail. It's going to give you absolutely no information and not going to be able to tell you whether or not how to treat it. When we go into this, we'll talk about this in a bit, but if you get low counts, you're going to want to treat it differently than high counts, and you need that count to figure out exactly what you can and cannot do and where you want to go from here. You could go anywhere in your house, really, and find positive samples if you know where to look. If you're looking at your total coliform counts and your E. coli counts, if you get an E. coli count, you're pretty much eliminating the possibility of sample error. You've got some source there that's causing you a problem. You're not going to get a sample error E. coli source. You're going to probably need to go ahead and chlorinate that regardless of whatever the total coliform counts are. So even if your coliform counts are low, the E. coli is going to throw you and say you got to go ahead and treat at that point in time. Do not open that system and chlorinate for low coliform counts. It's hard to put an exact number. My labs usually come back with that most possible numbers, and I say usually about 10 or 20. If it's less than that, you probably want to go ahead and look at just reflushing the system and retesting to see if you had sample error or what happens at that point in time. Anytime that you open that system, we have some contractors, if you have a 1 or a 2 count on your test, and another contractor other than myself goes out there and opens up that well, dumps a bunch of chlorine down there and shot chlorinates it, guess what? The numbers are going to shoot up. I can almost guarantee it. You've introduced a foreign object into that well with the chlorine. You've gone ahead and opened up the system and possibly contaminated it at that point in time. As the chlorine went down, it knocked off all sorts of things on the sides of the well. Scale and different calcium counts and things like that are going to knock off and drop to the bottom. You've now stirred up that layer where that air-oxygen interface where things have built up on the side. You've caused all sorts of things, and more than likely you didn't actually do anything other than just make the count worse. So if you're not going to do it right, don't do it at all, basically. Make sure that the system's fresh properly with no dead ends. A lot of older homes have people that have worked on them for over 100 years. They've gone in there and they've cut off this line and that line and everywhere. There are all sorts of places that they have those dead ends. We found that with these older homes, until you get water to pass through those dead ends, chlorinated water to pass through those dead ends, you're not going to get the sample to read 0 at that point in time. You're always going to have low counts. We've had to have plumbers come on in, go through the entire house with us and the homeowner, find those dead ends, and then cut them and put actual valves on them that we can flush water through them, or they go back to as close as they can in the line and cut them and cap them there, not to leave anything more than just a very small little stub on that line. You need to be able to do that. Old homes are very notorious for having that problem. You want to make sure that you're flushing all your fixtures. Can't tell you how many times that homeowners tell me they don't flush because they never use that bathroom. And I'm sitting there going, if you don't flush the bathroom, you're still going to have the problem with the coliform bacteria. It's stuck in your lines. It gets stuck in the distribution system, and it likes to stay there. We also have times where people don't know about faucets outside of their house or outside of their building. We had one which was a Corn Belt Energy cooperative. And we had a problem with them that we could never get their sample clean. We finally found outside behind a bush that no one had ever used in the history of the building, there was a outside water spigot behind that bush. Once we were able to finally flush that water through that system properly and get chlorinated water all the way to all the different spigots, including that hidden faucet, we were finally able to get those coliform counts down. So you also want to make sure that all your fixtures that are installed are working. You don't want to be halfway through your process of trying to track all this stuff down and find all this, and then they tell you to go ahead, they want to go ahead and cut into the lines and install a hot water heater. Anytime that someone's going to cut into those lines, that's going to run the risk of popping a positive test and recontaminating the system with the coliform bacteria. If the count's 10 to 20, and that's kind of my own personal preference, then go ahead and you want to chlorinate. Talk a little bit about chlorination procedures. I like to say it's best to use a licensed contractor. He's going to know your depth of your well, your diameter of your well, and be able to calculate the volume of water that you have within the well itself. There are many different states are going to have code recommendations on the amount of parts per million that you're looking for. Within our state, it's 100 part per million is what we're looking for concentration of chlorine. Do not use or recommend household bleach. One thing I hate is when our health departments and our sanitarians go ahead and they talk about go ahead and just pour some bleach down your well. That happens quite a bit when a homeowner calls them up and says, what do? I smell something funny. And they say, just go ahead and pour some bleach down your well. Bleach is only a 7% solution. It's not shelf stable. So it's got a shelf life of about a year. Depends on how long you've had it in your house, how long is before you bought it on the shelf, and then how long have you had it in your house before it's any good or not. And then only 7%, you're gonna have to use a whole lot more of it than what you would if you were the licensed contractor and have access to what I use. I use a 70% solution. It's a sodium hypochlorite, which is my chlorine, and it's shelf stable for basically its life. So it can sit there all the time and wait to be used. And like I said, being a 70% solution, and then I know exactly how much to use to get to my parts per million, I can dose that properly. We're not talking about the old days where we talked about shocking it, where you just dump in a lot and hope that you did it. We're talking about going through a scientific process of trying to eliminate this bacteria that's in there, and how do you go through and do it. Other reasons not to recommend that homeowners chlorinate themselves. The chlorine itself, it's a corrosive. There's a lot of mechanical, where the pitless connects to the well and where the water actually leaves the well, there's a lot of mechanical contraptions and things right down there that are how that all attaches together. As you hit that with corrosive year after year after year, when I go and try to work on that, I'm going to either break it or it's not going to come apart, and it's going to get very expensive to go ahead and fix. I'm going to have to bring in backhoes. I'm going to have to basically dig up the entire pitless adapter, disconnect all that, and redo it all, because it's not going to come out the easy way. If you can, they make specialty products. Steriline is one of them. That's a jet lube product. I think Cody Chemical's making one now that's called like Chlor Plus. Those are pH balanced chlorines. What they do is they found over the years that chlorine will go ahead and raise that pH, and the higher the pH is, it's going to be a little less effective than if you kept it where it's supposed to be. Using the sterilines, using the sterilines and using the Chlor Plus, those are going to be a little bit better at what they call being biocidal, which is going to take care of more of your bacteria that are in the well. They're going to be a bit more effective than your standard chlorine. If you can't, standard chlorine is going to be fine. I use it as well. But if you have access to a better product, try to use it. More is not better, like we talked about. Try to know how much that you need to treat. Also, go ahead and get a test kit for chlorine. This test kit can be your standard pool test kit. It just has to register that you have that chlorine residual within the process. Like I said, I like to place the chlorine and the steriline in the well. I like to start pumping until I get a positive result of my kit, and that's my chlorine test kit. Once I do that, I like to go ahead and I like to recirculate the well. That's going to help to go ahead and wash any of the contaminants that we talked about. Every time you drop chlorine, you drop stuff, you get stuff that flakes off the sides of the casing. You get dirt and dust. Most of these wells all have vents on them, so you get all sorts of things down there. If you wash those walls of that casing, you help to kind of wash that up, get an entire mix of product in the well, and try to get as much of that column treated as you can in the well itself to distribute the chlorine throughout the well. Bypass the softener, like we talked about before. Most softeners, you're not going to be able to handle the chlorine. They just can't be chlorinated. There are a few out there that can be, but until you know which ones you can and which ones you can't, it's best to go ahead and just bypass them. Bring the chlorinated water up into the house, do the cold side, run it on the cold side at each faucet. You want to go ahead and kind of watch how much you're getting and where. As you go through and you go to one faucet, if you test it there and you go to the next faucet and you're never getting it, organics and other things in your water can kind of eat your chlorine residual up. I've had that before where I had a well in a house one time. I put in proper amount of chlorine. I had a great residual at the first faucet, went to the second faucet, never got it. Went back to the first faucet and I lost it there. It is gone. The chlorine residual had basically been eaten up by all the organics and the other things that were sitting there within the water. We had to do quite a bit of residual on that one to get it up high enough to be able to get to all the different faucets. And we had to do a lot of other special things on that particular house to go ahead and try to get it clean and clear. We did finally get a proper sample on that, but it can take sometimes several doses to go ahead and get the entire system. You do not want to overdose though. You want to run now that you've run the cold around there and through, you can run the hot. You want to remember that on your hot side, your hot water is going to hold your 40 to 100 gallons in that hot water heater that's not been treated yet. So you got to flush all that out first before you get that through to all your hot water faucets and your hot water lines. I usually like to let it sit for about 3 or 4 hours, longer if possible. Chlorine should kill on contact, but we're dealing with a world that we can't see, so I like to give it a little bit of time for just to go ahead and make sure that we've contacted properly. After the wait, you can go ahead and flush it out until any of the smell of the chlorine is eliminated. And then for, I say about a week or so, but it really is just a couple days, you want to flush the system inside and out. When you're flushing, you kind of think of it like this. Think of a house like a city, where you see them going out there and you flushing all the fire hydrants. What they're trying to do when they flush those fire hydrants is 2 things. They're, 1, trying to get chlorine down the line as far as possible, and 2, they're trying to bring that velocity, that water scouring movement going down those lines to pick up anything, any debris, any gunk, any nasty turbidity that's been sitting on the bottom of those lines, and kick that stuff up and kick it out of the lines and flush it. That way those lines get flushed clean and clear. That's what you're doing inside of a house. You're basically treating it like you're flushing the fire hydrants. So you want to go around, you want to turn on one faucet, let it run full blast for 5 minutes, shut it off, or sometimes I do it in groups of faucets, where you'll go ahead and you'll turn one on, flush for a little bit, turn another one on, flush for a little bit, turn another one on, flush for a little bit, and then shut them all down. Not to overdo that. A lot of times, especially with private wells, if you open up all the faucets all at once, you get a trickle out of each one, and you're not really getting any scouring, any velocity action moving through those lines. And then, like I said, take samples after you've done that for about a couple days before they go ahead and do the testing. Take the sample like we talked about it before, preferably in a couple different locations, one at the tank or one at the distribution system. And like I said, if you have the option, take it at several different spots within the system and kind of see, are you having a distribution, or are you having a distribution, or are you having a raw sample problem? Questions?
I think we'll wait till the end and do that as part of the panel. Is that all right?
That'd be fine.
All right. Let me introduce you. Oh, sure. So next we have David Hendrick from, where am I at here? From Bergersen, Caswell, and Maple Plain, Minnesota. I can't remember the company. So David is the incoming president of the National Groundwater Association, as well as being a water well contractor. So we met many times, I guess, but we were at a meeting last December for NGWA and started talking about this conference, and started out talking about drillers he knows, and it ended up with he found the time to come meet with us, and that's a great thing. And so, yeah, David Hendrick. Thanks.
First, just want to say thanks to Steve for having me down here. I've really appreciated working with you over the years, and it was an interesting opportunity to be able to be a part of this today. So thanks for having me. Kind of a little background on Bergersen Caswell. The well contracting company started in 1948. My grandfather actually started with the company in 1952. So the Hendricks have been there for many, many years. Bergersen Caswell is a full-service water well contractor. We do everything from residential wells, municipal wells, water conditioning, geothermal irrigation, environmental drilling and sampling, geotechnical work, and more recently have got into directional and horizontal drilling. The primary care of Bergersen Caswell is customer service. It really, we really respect the resource we're working with and our responsibility to our customers. So making sure that we're delivering fresh water, making sure that our customers are taken care of is really what Bergersen Caswell strive to do since Ray Bergersen and Tom Caswell started the company. That's them in the lower right. And BC was started as primarily a municipal well contracting firm that moved into the residential field, and then into the 70s and 80s kind of spread out into the environmental sector, and more recently started doing a lot of geothermal work. And so Bergersen's been, has always looked at what else can we do for our customers, what else can we do in the industry, and how can we be good stewards of the resource. I included this picture because it's kind of an oddity, like a picture of Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, David Hendrick on the back of a drill rig. Oddly enough, someone here from Wisconsin, that's the reason that picture exists, photographic evidence that I actually can operate a drilling rig. So I started at a really young age, 15 years old, started sweeping floors, started drilling wells when I was 18. and worked summers through high school and college. Came back full-time in 2001. Attained my Minnesota drilling license in the early 2000s. I obtained my certified well driller and pump installer certification from the NGWA around the same time. I got my certified vertical closed loop driller certification. Recently got my certified geo exchange designer in training. And I've held licenses in Nebraska and Indiana as well over my career. I kind of moved into our environmental department and started managing that from 2005 to 2007, and then managed our geothermal department from 2007 to 2015 and became our vice president in 2014. So, it's kind of odd. Most people, when you spend 20 years in an industry, kind of, that's a career, right? In this industry, it seems like 20 years is a good start. Because as I get to travel to conferences and talk with people who really know what they're talking about, they've been doing this for 30 plus years or 40 years in some cases. So this industry, I've found there's always things to learn and always people to learn things from, which has really worked out well for me and something I really appreciate about our industry. Some of my professional activities, as Steve said, I'm the president-elect of the National Groundwater Association Board of Directors. The NGWA is an 11,000 member organization of scientists, engineers, contractors, manufacturers, and suppliers, all working for the betterment of groundwater. They work for, our primary focus is education, public awareness, educating our industry, raising standards. The NGWA has put out many best suggested practices, white papers. We have an ANSI water well standard. We're a federal advocate for groundwater. And really, I would need an entire half hour just to talk about all the activities that organization engages in, and I'm very proud to be a member of it. I'm the vice president of the Minnesota Water Well Association Board of Directors, which is more of a contractors focused organization, but has real similar goals to the NGWA in that, if we don't protect the resource, take care of the resource, be a good steward of the resource, we're not going to have much of an industry to work in. I'm the vice chair of our Minnesota Department of Health Advisory Council, which is one of the reasons that I really jumped at the opportunity to come to this conference, because I've always had and maybe it's just because of my last name and my family's involvement in the industry in Minnesota, but I've always had a very good relationship with the Department of Health. I've really appreciated how they've worked with me over my career, and really more of almost a partnership building role, and much less as your conventional well cop. So, and I've also spent a little bit of time with the International Ground Source Heat Pump Association doing some volunteer work there. At the NGWA, I'm the past chair of our Government Affairs Committee, past chair of our Energy Subcommittee, our NGWA PAC supporter. I work on our Geothermal Task Group, our McElhaney Lecture Task Group, and I'm also the NGWA Foundation board member, a member of that board. And that the foundation is who backs the Darcy Lecture Series, the McElhaney Lecture Series. The foundation supports research and education, as well as some developing nation programs as well. For the Minnesota Water Well Association, I work with our legislative committee and our convention committee. And really, you'll notice there's a little bit of a common thread from the legislative front, because I've always felt that, we need to advocate for our industry. And one thing on the contracting side of the industry is that we do a lot of different things in the water well contracting world. We're truck drivers, we're welders, we're machine operators. We have to have a lot of core competencies to perform our work. And what happens is that a lot of regulations that are attended at primary users, truck drivers, machine operators, silica mine, drill rig operators, a lot of regulations that are kind of supposed to be focused on one particular sector end up catching our industry in the middle of it. So, as I like to say, we're the dolphin that comes up with the tuna on a lot of these regulations. They don't mean to catch us, but they do. So we always try to raise awareness of what those regulations are going to do to a fairly important and small industry. And so I was asked what I saw as some of the future groundwater concerns. I think one of the biggest ones, the lack of awareness and understanding of the resource. I recently saw an invitation to a conference, a water conference, and it was a groundwater focus conference where the logo that they used was a water droplet with a water tower right in the middle of the water droplet. Like, that's where your drinking water comes from, right? It's just, poof, right there in the water tower, ready for you to drink. And so, people don't necessarily think all the way back, okay, so it's coming out of the tap, but where is it coming from? And so bringing the awareness of do you have a private well? Where does your water come from that you use? I think that, as we talked earlier, we kind of seems like we push that ball up the hill and up the hill and up the hill. And every time it seems like we're going to get it to come down the other side, it rolls back on top of us or something else gets in the way. But trying to educate and trying to get proper materials, trying to come from a common ground and really raise awareness is very important. Politicizing the resource. This, I think, is probably one of my greatest concerns, because in my opinion, once something ends up on the political pendulum, nobody wins. It's going to go left and right and left and right. And quite honestly, our industry probably can't survive that kind of activity because we're just not big enough. We're not going to, a lot of this industry, a lot of the people that work in it, aren't going to survive 8-year swings of good to bad to good to bad. We really need to look at, and we should be really making decisions based on, best available science, really letting our organizations that have access to this information make decisions, help make decisions. There's a lot of areas around the country right now that you're really caught up in this political activism of what do you do with groundwater. Washington State, Montana are two specific examples that have ongoing legislative battles trying to, who has right to the water? Whose water is it? How do we access it? And once you get to that point, it gets very, very expensive to try to get your way. So trying to stay out of that the political solutions to what we should do with the resources is very important. Competing interests, we're seeing that all over the country. California is a great example. What's more important, drinking water or almonds? It seems like a pretty easy question until you talk to people that say, well, I really like almonds. It's like, well, I'm pretty sure people would not like to die of dehydration. So, we need to look at what are the best use of groundwater? What's resilient? How can we serve everyone's needs? Because it is about groundwater use. Because I don't think if you put, Minneapolis is a great example where they went and shut in all of the one-pass cooling wells from underneath the city. Well, that aquifer is recovering, probably right to the level of a lot of the big buildings in the town, to the point where they have to de-water to make sure that their substructures don't go underwater. So, understanding what we can use, how much we can use, and realizing that the history of the water cycle is much longer than we probably have data to predict. So being able to deal with that dynamic situation going forward is very important. Low valuation of water, and not necessarily just in the monetary sense, as much of a respect for the resource, understanding that water has value. Because the reality is everyone needs water. So we can't try to, I think if you try to put, use, monetary stimulus to try to raise that appreciation of water, really is just going to stratify, who's using water. Because quite frankly, there's people in this world that just write the check. I don't care. $10,000, sure. I want a green lawn. And then the people that need the water get somewhat disadvantaged to it. So trying to, raise the respect for the resource and using water properly, I see as a big issue. And I'll take one for my industry, is that the contractor's resistance to improving practices. I think that as an industry, contractors really need to embrace, what does a good code look like? What is the best use of the resource? How can we do a better job of interfacing with our customers, being more aware? Just using the arsenic example from this morning. There's kind of two pieces of data in there. One that says the well installer doesn't always give the best information to the homeowner, but then the homeowner, 48% of people that had recommended treatment options from their contractor went with that option. So The well contractor has already built some trust with the well owner in that case, and is going to take the recommendations. So how do we improve the contractor's practices, get them better information, so they can give them the right answer and understand it? Because I've seen that arsenic talk we saw. That's like the third or fourth time I've seen that talk, and every time I pick up a little more information out of it. So if I'm still learning from it, I'm sure there's still more work we can do inside the industry on arsenic and other topics, just to make people more aware. And what can we do together? Educate. It's the best form of enforcement. As I said, I've been pretty lucky during my career to work with some really good enforcement people in our state that wanted to get out and teach you what the right way to do a procedure, what was the right weight for the grout, why we do what we do, why the code is important. And I think it really is the best form of getting the job done right, best way to get the job done right. Actively engage the industry and work with your willing partners. Sometimes I think there's a pull to go to the lowest common denominator and try to pull them up. Sometimes, a better approach might be just find your willing partners, work with them, and then drag everybody else along kicking and screaming. Because it really, some people, I've got no desire to have people doing substandard work in my industry. Absolutely just don't have any desire to see it. So anything that I can do to help people understand why we should be elevating our practices, I'm more than willing to help do. Realize that we're industry partners. We do have a symbiotic relationship. Really with one there isn't the other. So we need to make sure that codes and standards are upheld, that people are performing work to the highest levels, and really continue to improve those standards. Have a sound, logical enforcement model. Don't fall into the engineer's trap. Just because you can write it on paper doesn't always mean that it'll work in reality. So make sure that we were talking about some Wisconsin laws. It's like, well, we wrote it. Well, now how are we going to do it? How are we going to enforce it? Is it just something that we're making the good eggs follow while all the bad eggs just kind of cut the corners? Make sure that we've got a model that everyone can follow and enforce. And gather industry input when crafting rules. As part of the Minnesota Department of Health's Advisory Council, we get to, at minimum, discuss the regulations that are coming down the pipe and really look at it. Can we do this as an industry? Can it be performed? Is it practical? Is it the best science? And that I think that input process makes rules a lot easier to enforce and apply when you actually get them out on the street. So, thank you. That was all. Thank you.
So our third driller is Corbin Gingrich from Gingrich Well and Pump Service in Kelowna, Iowa. And I reached out to Corbin after I met him last year. We were working with Chris Adams in Hancock County to seal a well that was basically in downtown Macomb. An old dug well was in somebody's backyard. And Corbin and his son, who's also a driller, came over and sealed the well, provided the bentonite, and actually we're educating some of the health professionals who were there as it's kind of a workshop, I guess you'd say. They got CEUs for it. And so I did a great job in front of those guys telling them what was going on and trying to help them understand what was going on there. And I just thought, so we reached out and willing to come over. So, all right, thank you.
Willing might be a little bit of a stretch, but I do a better job with probably hard hat and boots and a little mud on the ground. But anyway, like you said, I'm Corbin Gingrich, and I'm the part of the third generation of Gingrich Well. Let's see if I can get this thing running. Anyway, the slides aren't all, my topic's going to bounce around a little bit. When I talked to Steve originally, he kind of said, just hit on some things that you feel are deficits, or where they could be better, or what you see a lot of. And a lot of it boils down to, I think, when I kept trying to refine further and further, okay, what's the core is, and everybody's hit on it, it's relationships. We see a lot in the sanitation side. I guess out of curiosity, and you got people all over the country too, but how many people in here deal directly with a contractor of some kind, like a driller? I mean, yeah, good. Anyway, we see it. We work in primarily 3 different states, Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri. A lot of different rules. I mean, and there's counties in Iowa that I can get a phone call at 5 o'clock on Friday night, I need a well, and depending what county they're in, I might tell them, I'll see you in 2 weeks. And they say, but I'm out of water. And I say, there's nothing I can do. That county is 2 weeks. And it's been getting better. And then there's counties that I can turn around and say, hey, I know the sanitarian. I've got his cell number. I can make a call. We can get emergency locate. I think I'll see you Monday morning. And so the process is getting better. But I would say, again, the relationship side, the better a relationship we have with the county, the better things move. And in the end, sometimes when there's stumbling blocks, I kind of feel like when the customer's here and the sanitarian's here and I'm standing in the middle waiting for the thing to get done to say, okay, we're okay, raise the derrick and drill a well, I sometimes stand back and think, you do realize that you're working for them and we're kind of the middleman, and we're trying to keep peace everywhere, and it works good. But I think, again, the relationships is the biggest thing. And if we can keep moving as far as going forward with the phone calls, with the showing up, and our best relationships with counties are the counties that we see. There's some counties that I've probably drilled a dozen wells in a year, and I've never met the sanitarian. And that's not that they're not coming out. Sometimes they're there ahead of time. They're doing GPS coordinate. They're checking our distances afterwards. And some of those counties, a lot of counties, the person's in charge, especially on the Illinois side, I see, they're in charge of food. They're inspecting restaurants. My sanitarian in what used to be in my home county, and they subbed that out. He used to have to check the drains on the swimming pool. He had a pair of swim trunks in the back of his car, and he was well inspection in the morning, checking the kitchen at McDonald's in the afternoon, and going for a swim in the evening to check the drains. And so they're wearing a lot of different hats. But kind of a backup of where we came from, much like some of these guys. My grandpa started the business, and kind of maybe by default, he's obviously gone at this point, but my grandpa started the well drilling business pretty much because he was too cheap to pay somebody to fix his well. And he went out, and that's obviously not one of them. We still have parts of the one, but he went out and built something to drill his well, and it was in a 120-foot alluvial aquifer area, an old 3-inch well with a windmill on top, and literally built it, drug it out in the field, drilled his well, and went back to tear it back apart again. And the neighbor said, "Hey, before you do that, I want one." And that was like 1955. And anyway, my brother and I, like I say, are partners in the business, and both of our oldest sons are working in the business now. And so we're hoping it carries on, seeing some good interest from the 4th generation. We did get a lot of our education was with boots and hard hats. We attend a lot of seminars and work with a lot of friendly competitors. We say back and forth. There's times we might learn more from a competitor than we do from a seminar. We get a phone call every now and then and say, "Hey, I'm stuck in the hole. This and this. And, what'd you have above you?" And honestly, those are some of the best conversations that we have, because it's what we do. We enjoy what we do, and I know I speak for my brother on that also. But kind of to go over some things of kind of in various with the size of business that we're getting and the number of employees we've got in different departments. We've got 39 different employees working with us. Some guys for 6 months of the year might be sandblasting, painting equipment. It doesn't have anything to do with water wells, but the wells don't get drilled if they don't do their job, and that's back to the relationship side of it. And like I said, we're primarily in Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri. And I'd say, looking back over the last 5 years, which was kind of the easiest thing to compile, just because of the computer software, but in the last 5 years, we've averaged 475 wells per year. We work with a lot of 80% of the wells that we drill, we would work with would be kind of an out-of-town well for us. We would work with the local contractor that's maybe a hardware store that puts in pumps, or maybe somebody that does septics and they also do pump repair. And so 80% of the wells we drill, we would drill the well, work with the local, what we would call the pump installer, and then also run into the sanitation at that side. And they would finish the well work, and then the 20% of the work we do, we would also do pump repair. But anyway, we've primarily got 4 main crews that we go out. We're getting more and more into some municipal projects. We bought some larger equipment for some deeper projects and do a little bit of oil and gas exploratory stuff for some gas fields. But for the most part, our bread and butter is residential, ag, some irrigation, and the industry has definitely changed. I remember many a nights sitting at the kitchen table, phone rings, and Dad's comment was, "Yep, we'll have a rig there in the morning." And now it's not quite like that. You still got your Illinois, you've got your Julie calls, in Iowa, you've got your one call, and back to touching base with the sanitation department, getting a permit, and again, back to, I can't say it enough, those relationships. It's so nice to be able to tell a customer that you've worked for 20 years, I'll be right there. Because if you have a county that you have that relationship with, and especially in Illinois too, budget cuts are a big thing. So, every chance you get to put a plug in to kind of keep some funding coming to these sanitation sides, if the county doesn't have a person that we can contact, it's more of a risk for us, and we're maybe slower to respond because we sit there and say, okay, there's some hoops that need gone through, and we don't really have that person we can just make a quick phone call to, and that's made the jobs more and more difficult. But we work in about 93 different counties across those 3 states, and again, right back to, I could probably tell you there's 15 of those guys, I got their home cell phone numbers in my pocket, and any given time I can call them and ask them a question, and it's great to have those relationships. And it's gotten better, especially in the last few years. When we first started coming further and drilling more into Illinois, we ran into something we don't have in Iowa. We'd get our well permits and get our paperwork all in a row. And in Illinois a few years ago, and they've slightly changed their rule a little bit, but had a 48-hour window that they wanted notified that, okay, I've got a permit in your county, and I'll pick on Chris since he helped Steve remember my name when they were trying to come up with speakers. So anyway, but I could call Chris Monday morning and say, hey, I'll be there on Wednesday, and Chris is a guy that, because of that relationship, I can turn around and say, hey, I've got a rig sitting 2 miles down the road. They're going to be done tomorrow night. Is there any way I can get there? And they've been great to work with. And there's been some counties that I've been told, yeah, no problem. I'll meet you out there. If I'm late, don't worry about it. Get started. I've seen your work before. Call me when you go out. I really want to be there for that. And then I've had some counties turn around and say, nope, except 48 hours. And we've kind of gone through the spectrum of calling back a couple times and saying please, and sometimes they stick to their guns, but that I don't have any problem with those rules. We get a little frustrated sometimes when the 48-hour window rolls around and then the inspector didn't show up, and then we start saying, well, why did we wait 48 hours if it's really not that important to see? But I know that scheduling's important. They have gone to in Illinois to where they don't necessarily have to see every grout inspection, but they have to catch you a certain number of times a year. So it's much better now that we don't turn around and all of a sudden, if the schedule doesn't fit and it's an emergency, they can say, hey, I've done your inspection, and you're good to go for this period of time. But water testing, as we've gone to, and it seems like everybody keeps hitting on water testing. Water testing is huge. Like he was saying, it used to be 1 or 2 a week. I bet my dad didn't take 10 tests a year, and now we can almost Monday morning tell when there's been an article in the paper about water tests. The answering service over the weekend, if it's not an emergency, they don't forward it to our pagers, and we get there Monday morning, and it's like, what paper is this? And you look down, and sure enough, you start figuring out the town. And people get a little bit panicked, and we start going down that. And the spectrum of things is, Iowa's done a good job with some water testing, as far as making some grants to counties to where they can turn around and say, okay, hey, we're going to turn this over to the health department, let the health department come in, and we've seen different things too with working with health departments. The health department sometimes isn't maybe it's a newer person or there's someone that hasn't done a lot of water sampling, and we had a little subdivision of 5 homes, and one house kept failing. And of course, they were the most vocal person in the crowd. We finally said, forget it. We're going to try to go take our own test. And I could never get a hold of this person. I finally asked the county, I said, how did you get a sample? These people are never home. And he said, well, I finally just took a sample outside. And like you, I'm like, don't go to that outside spigot. So when I went there, I knocked on the door, nobody home, figured maybe they just weren't answering my call, and went around the outside and still couldn't find a spigot. So I called the county sanitarian and said, I'm not even finding a spigot. And they said, well, it's by the back door. And so I went to the back door, and bushes all over growing over the house. And sure enough, I crawled underneath this bush, knocked down all the cobwebs, moved the dog bowl, and there's the sample. And I called the guy back and said, please don't tell me that this is the spigot that you're at. And he's like, well, that's all I got. And so I agree, but so we ended up getting inside, getting a good sample, got everybody calmed down. But again, the sampling's huge. And I would agree the count of a sample, and I don't know how many counties do samples through the sanitation side of it, but that most probable number, that bacteria count, over and over will get people back, calling back saying, hey, I just drilled a brand new well. I just spent this money, I built this house, and I failed this test. And we hate to hear that for starters, but a failed test sometimes is so close to not being a failed test, we really need that count to know where you're at. We get pass fails, and then they test it again, and it's still a fail. And even with the older wells, I've had people call me and say, hey, we can't pass the test. We just want a new well. And you show up and look at the well, and it's not in a well pit. It's got a good cap on it. It seems like a system with some integrity to it. And you say, just wait. Let's take one sample. Let's go to that sample tap. Get one sample that didn't go through the softener, didn't go through the aerator, and a lot of times we'll find it's a relatively low count. And sometimes they're laughing at us saying, well, I told you I wanted a well drilled, and now here, you're going to do a couple $100 worth of treatment, and you just worked yourself out of a job. But at the same time, I feel like that's where that relationship can be built between us and them, and the trust goes a long way. But there's a lot of times those systems can be cleaned up if we just realize that they're not off the charts with water, with bacteria counts. And we don't see as much of the arsenic as I'm hearing in here. We're seeing more and more of it. Northwest Iowa north central Iowa's got some areas, and even locally we've got some areas with some little lower counts of arsenic, but kind of bouncing back and forth again on what we do. Some of our municipal stuff, my brother does a lot of that. I think a lot of the reasons we do some of the jobs we do, and I'm sure you guys are the same way in the water oil industry, sometimes the phone rings and it's maybe a job you'd rather not do. That doesn't sound like it's conducive to being a productive project, but a lot of times some of the jobs that no one else wants can be some of the best jobs you'll wind up getting. It doesn't always seem that way up front, but we've kind of always prided ourselves in the fact that there's times I know I'm not the most cost-effective person. I shouldn't say cost-effective. I'm not the cheapest person on the list, and there's times that I'll still get the job, and I'll ask the customer, well, why? And he said, well, I could tell when the other guy showed up, he didn't want to do it. He didn't see it as a challenge. He didn't see it as something that in the end that he'll be proud of what he did. And he said, I liked what you had to say, and it's back to relationships. Show up on the job, boots on the ground, shake a hand, and and again, work with your counties, work with your, I'm used to the Iowa side a little more, so I keep saying county, and I know that you get into some other states and it's regional, but those contacts are huge. Again, some of this is the fourth generation coming on. Both my brother and I's oldest sons are certified well drillers. That kind of an odd picture, that one on the lower left, it's my brother and I. That's actually an artesian well gone bad. We were in an area with some flowing walls and knew some pressures and some elevations, and we were almost on the top of a hill. And it was the night before Thanksgiving about 10 years ago, and drilled this well. Everything was going good. And we expected a 15 to 20 foot water level. Well, before the project was done, it was not. And the water you see in the background, it's not being airlifted. It's not being pumped. We slept in our pickups, missed Thanksgiving, and called the cement company in on Thanksgiving Day to bring us 6 loads of concrete to get the well cap. But we had about 1,100 gallons a minute rolling down the hill, and it was an exciting Thanksgiving season. And then back to, again, relationships. We've got, sometimes, depending on the mechanics in the season and the summer help, we've had up to 39 guys, and, we've kind of gone to, we know everybody by name. My brother and I work with the business, and both of us are boots on the ground every day. We've got guys, obviously key guys, as every company does, that you turn to in a pinch, and you sit there every morning with a list of where you have to go and who you have to send, and you start shuffling that around. And this is back in the Illinois struggle of the 48 hours that we're getting past. But you start saying, well, this particular well, this guy's really good at, and his rig is 60 miles away, and this one is 5 miles away. But it doesn't matter. I'm sending him over there. And then sometimes you get there and the contractor unloaded rafters in the driveway, and here you sit, you can't get in the drive. And so working with the counties is important, that they can see that transition is not on purpose, when we sometimes say we're going to show up and get there and can't, and call and cancel, and then call back 2 days later in a hurry because the concrete crew wants in. Anyway, I don't know if these slides are going to keep rolling or not, but I had a couple other things on here, and these were just some slides from our website and out of our little photo album at the shop. The grouting thing, as they talked about in the Nebraska study, I see that as a huge thing, and I think Illinois also. I remember when Illinois went to full hole grout, a lot of guys were like, son of a gun, this is going to add time, this is going to add money, and they were ahead of the game on that, and that's fantastic. I think we're getting there in Iowa, I feel. I do probably have some issues, with, and I don't want to turn this into picking on competitors, because that's not the thing, but we all need to step up our game. We all need to get to the point where we say, you know what, if you think something might help, do it. If you know something might help and no one's asking you to do it anyway. And so, grouting is huge in that way. I've had guys, the geothermal market was a little tougher in Iowa. It got real competitive. A lot of rigs showed up, especially when the tax refunds were there. And, I've had guys that work for me, witness guys, drilling geothermal fields, showing up on the last day, putting one bag of chips down the well and stuffing them in with a broom handle and putting them away and leaving. And I'm sitting there thinking, now I've got to go to that next door neighbor and make a 200-foot sand and gravel well and still try to get a good test. And now there's 3 basically 200-foot sand and gravel wells with no grout in them right next door to me. And so a lot of those things that we just got to be more conscientious as contractors. We have to do the best we can. We have to have that knowledge of what's going on downhole. And I've known the guys from Kickapoo for a while. I've been at a lot of meetings with them. They do a real good job of helping with some education stuff. We've sent guys over to their shop for some education for their Illinois groundwater certification. I haven't got to meet Dave, but it's obvious by the amount of experience he's got into it. He knows these things, that we've got to step up our game. We have to, some states are, I'm not sure about up north, the battle of rural water. And we say the battle, it's a competitor to us. In the end, is it a good thing? Yeah, I hate to see the young couple out of college get married, build a house, and all of a sudden need a $10,000 well. But at the same time, when they expand their farm and need a well because of livestock and the cost of rural water, we need to be there as a viable resource for them. And if they can get a reasonable well and turn around and have that paid for, but there's times that you have remote areas and there's rural water available, and there's I can think of places here in Illinois that the 2 options are a 700-foot dug well, or a 700-foot drilled well, or some rural water on the Iowa side. And I sit there and say, I can't blame you for that choice. For $1,000 you can get hooked up and running, or $25,000 and you're going to need a water well. But if we can present a package that is viable, that is reusable, and is something that, when we're back to the testing side, to present that package and turn around and fail water test after water test after water test, we kind of didn't do ourselves any good, and we kind of lose a little respect in the hindsight of all that. But anyway, that's kind of all I've got. I appreciate your time, and I don't know if I'm over or under, but so.
Okay, so we have 30 minutes. And so the idea here really was we knew that most of the folks who were coming to this event were either public health professionals or educators or researchers or regulators. And so, the whole point of having the drillers panel is to have some drillers up here to talk about the issues that they see in the industry, things that are their pet peeves if there are any, or that work well. And so my hope is we can spend the next 30 minutes asking them questions. And because my take on things is we have a lot to do, even as a groundwater hydrologist, to working with health professionals. A lot of times they don't understand groundwater, and I don't understand public health that well. Most of the time, my take is we should have teams of people working on these issues, not one or the other. And I see that way too much as the bottom line. So any questions for these guys, either for their talk or just in general? And just come up to the mic if you would.
So, having worked at a health department for many years, the bidding process, when you guys bid to do a private well for somebody, for some drillers, it also includes like going back a couple times to chlorinate if you have positive samples, or they'll like guarantee the well to be silt-free. What kind of guarantees or warranties come with a private household well, like the pump and things like that? Any of you, all of you.
You got,
Hello?
yeah, you're on.
All right. Guarantees that go with it. You have your manufacturer's warranties on most of your pumps, tanks, things like that. Some contractors will go farther and do more extended warranties. We'll go up to 5 years on that. Now, when you're talking your potability, sand-free, silt-free, there is an expectation in the Illinois Water Code of sand-free water to a certain point. There is not a quality type issue with it. It won't be calcium free, or it won't be softened. It won't be this, because there's no way, especially in the area that I work in, you've got some of the worst water and some of the best water I've seen within about 3 miles of each other when it comes to not potability, but quality with, like I said, the calcium counts, the iron counts, pHs, tannins, things like that. On what else? What other guarantees that you have for chlorination and things? Usually I don't include it in, say, my bid or my process. I'm still a little bit behind the times in the fact that I like to go out there and do the handshake and a smile for most of my contracting, where I will usually do like a one-page estimate or quote. Listing out all the different things that I'm kind of going to do. I haven't gone to the multi-page full-out contract yet that lists out specifically, well, I'm going to drill your well to this spot, to this particular depth, and then I'm going to go ahead and we're going to test it, and we're going to come back and chlorinate it 3 times. Then usually I'll give them several chlorinations to get to a certain point, but if I have to start going past chlorinations where it's not legal in the state to go ahead and put chlorinators on, but they allow it when I go ahead, I'm doing it to try to get good tests, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a residual up to a certain point. If I got to go ahead and I got to put chlorinators on, then I got to come back and check those every day and do things like that. Then I go ahead and I start charging fees as to that. If I got to go a little bit above and beyond the norm, then I go ahead and make sure that I'm covering myself at that point in time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's a lot of, and I'm assuming he's in the same boat. You've got some unwritten, we've always said I can stand behind the products that are in the well. I can stand behind my workmanship. There's certain areas that I'd go to that I would say, sometimes we know ahead of time. Good example, 2 months ago, we had a project, went in an area, the area is quite diverse as far as water quality, but had an area that I wouldn't have expected it pulling in, pull a county permit, nobody's really raising any red flags at this point, drill a well, got done, and the nitrate level was higher than we expected. It was an area where I expected to see a little bit of nitrate, but the nitrate level was quite high. And at that point, of course, the customer's saying, hey, what's going on here? And we dug into it a little deeper, and the county dug back in some archives and said, okay, I found 5 wells within a mile here, and the nitrate level's high on all of them. And the guy we started questioning, and the customer was present, the county was present, we started questioning the grouting and started saying, hey, you know what? As they talked about, sometimes grouts fail. We pressure grouted the well, it was put into code, and it was put in, like I say, not to pawn it off on the county at all, but the customer's question is, well, how do I know you did what you were supposed to do? Because I don't know anything about a well. And we kind of lean back and say, well, the county's here and they know what we're supposed to do, and they would agree we did it the way we're supposed to do it. And in that situation, we came back and said, look, there is some water pH issues, and if anybody's worried about the fact that the bentonite broke down or the bentonite didn't get everywhere it needed to be due to channeling or whatnot, we said, we'll come back in and we're gonna go off the site 100 feet. We're gonna make the well again. And in some conversation with the county, we decided it was maybe a better fit for cement grout, and turned around and changed what we did. And in the end, we still had a nitrate count. And in that situation, it was something that the customer's like, well, I don't think I should have to pay again. And I said, well, you're not going to have to. I said, I agree. We're questioning the outcome. So our particular way to approach that was, I'm going to say, you know what, you're only going to pay for what I did different. You paid me for a 215-foot well 2 months ago. You're going to pay me. The only thing different is I'm going to use cement grout. In the meantime, he had got online, of course, and said, well, maybe I need better casing. And I said, well, I don't think that's the case. The casing's rated at 200 feet, and we've only set it to 170 in this range, and actually it's rated 260 feet. But okay, we'll put in a heavier walled casing. So we used the heavier walled plastic casing, which was kind of a moot point in my opinion, but the cement grouting wasn't a bad idea in that spot. And in the end, we just said, okay, if you're willing to pay that difference, that's all we're going to charge you for. And in the end, when the nitrate level come back high, the customer, of course, still has a nitrate level he has to deal with, but he at least feels like, you know what, you did your part. And I kind of get the impression he felt like, in the end, I kind of got 2 wells for the price of one, and I'm going to plug the one, but we feel like we need to stand behind every decision we can. I'd love to go backwards and start saying, okay, every time I pull a permit, I'm asking the county to dig in the archives and find me all the logs around it, and it just doesn't always happen that way. But so we've usually said we can't stand behind the quality as far as, like he was referring to, the iron and calcium and magnesium and all that stuff. But there's even certain parts in the northeast part of the state where we know up ahead of time, say, hey, you either wind up with a 200-foot well with a nitrate level that you're going to have to agree to live with, or you drill a 600-foot well and you don't have that, and you don't have to treat it. So a lot of times our bidding process would say, if we know that problematic area, we'll get down and, we'll send them 2 bids and say, just be aware of that 200-footer that, you've got neighbors all over the board with different nitrate levels. And again, that's part of the state we don't see as much arsenic, but that if it's there, we'll work with you as all we can, but we try to stand behind the workmanship and the product. The flow is something that's always questionable too. We've got a few areas that it's hard to get a 5-gallon minute well in, and if there's not real water available, they don't have any choice, and we can't ever stand behind the quantity. But
I know when you work at a health department, you try to encourage people not to take the low bid on a job. Make sure you're comparing the work on equal footing. This guy might leave the supply line and not cover it. You look at your bid. You could never recommend somebody, and that makes it really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, there's definitely a value component to it. Just real quick, the tag on the sand-free, silt-free, well development is one area that is absolutely a differentiator between a lot of contractors out there, where some will, predominantly you'll see an airlift method for developing a lot of residential wells. Some people turn it on till it clears up and walk away. Other people spend time, functionally working the formation, sorting their gravel packs, or developing their open hole to make sure that they are to that sand-free, silt-free point, and it absolutely makes a difference between, quote A and quote B.
Go ahead.
Mark, you mentioned chlorination, and I've been having a discussion with well drillers in Vermont, where I'm working with Department of Health, about customers complaining about the level of chlorine in their system after shock chlorination. And so we're talking about at what level should we actually shock chlorinate the system after a new well has been drilled. And I have been, maybe this is a question for everyone, because I've been trying to figure out, so, some states say 100 and some say 50 and some say 200, but I haven't really been able to find any sort of scientific research that that sort of says why that is. And I was wondering if anyone would know anything about that. Help me with clearing that out.
The scientists and the engineers in the room probably are going to be the better ones to ask about that. You're right. There is no 100% certainty on. Everybody's got a slightly different level that they'd like to see that chlorine residual placed to do its best. I understand why they're trying to get to a point where it's not so much that it becomes really corrosive. It's not so much that it becomes to the point where it's not doing its job, that it's raising that pH out of whack. They're also worried about long-term methods and chlorination, things like that. If you put too much of the chlorine in there, especially with PVC casings, and leaching out all the bad trihalmethanes and all the nasty stuff that you're going to get out of doing that. So they're trying to walk that fine line between how much you can put in and how much you can't. So it's, like I said, I know what our state requires, and that's pretty much the guidelines that I go by with the 100 part per million. I know EPA is a different level, and like I said, there's another different level floating around out there somewhere else, but I'd probably not be the expert to ask on that one, but somebody else in the room might be able to help you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to get dirty looks from the health department that's sitting right here. But yeah, go ahead.
Break point chlorination. Technically, you want enough chlorination to reach break point where you have free chlorine in the water to disinfect the system.
Right.
That's basically the goal. So whether that means 100 parts per million, or on that one system you were talking about that you just lost all your residual, that one you might have had to break up to 500 parts per million in the well to get enough residual in the distribution system to reach break point to have enough free chlorine to disinfect the system.
So have there been any studies that show that, I'm sorry, has there been any studies then showing that 100 part per million?
So
It's about
come to the mic, okay?
So Virginia Tech is currently working on this. We have a bunch of students working in the summer looking at how much chlorine do we need to add, what elements in our well water will use up the chlorine, so we can make it, site specific. I'd be happy to share that with you when we're all done. It's a 3-month experiment, and I think we started 2 weeks ago or so. But yeah, we're also doing a state or survey of all the shock chlorination protocols given out by states. So if anyone wants to help us, we would love to, because some of them are very hard to find. But yeah, so we're trying to get an idea of who's doing what and what actually works in terms of shock chlorination. We'd be happy to share.
So then from my 2 cents, we developed a private well class. I probably looked at 50 or 60 of those. And the one I chose to use was because of how thorough it was and how easy it was for the well owner to understand the step-by-step process. And that was the one from the Minnesota Department of Health. They get the prize. What's interesting, though, the most interesting part of this, though, is last year at a meeting, one of the regional Minnesota Department of Health staff were at a meeting I was at, and he came up and found me and said, on your webinar in March where you said this document from 2012 that they updated and made it, their marketing people said it should be made more succinct. And so it went from like 10 pages down to 6. And I was on a webinar and I said, I still use the 10-page one because it's got pictures, it shows people exactly what they're supposed to do, it's got the table in it still. And he came up and said, all the staff wanted to use the 10-page one. It was their administration that made them switch it. So we still list the 10-page one on our website for the private well class. But like I said, that wasn't mostly to look at whether it's, I don't even remember what level it says on that there, but it's because it's for a well owner, it needs to be the process they have to follow. Some of them are, half of a sheet, and that's not enough information. Well owners don't know what they're doing in too many cases, which goes back to the point of some of them probably shouldn't be disinfecting their wells in the first place. Oh, who was first? Thank you.
Just a side comment on that. We're looking at shifting all our publications to tell people to call a well professional rather than trying to do it themselves, because there's too many things that can go wrong. So my question for the panelists, I'm a regulator from Wisconsin, and it sounds like all 3 of you are industry professionals that respect the role of regulation. So I'm willing to challenge you with this question. Are there some regulations that you've run across that you're willing to share that you think just don't make any sense or are too difficult to follow, that you can just give us some ideas as we try to have effective regulations, but also trying to understand how does it work from your perspective? Something that doesn't make sense or is too hard to follow.
Yeah, real simple one, and he actually said it once already, and it's not necessarily a regulation, but just maybe a protocol or a common practice is, I could never understand, and I was the same way, that the mandatory sample tap that never gets used. And you get the customer, again, they're upset, they have a new system and they didn't pass the test, and you ask them about the sample tap and they said, well, no, nobody ever went in the basement. And we've kind of got to the point where we've said, you know what, we'll be glad to come out. If it's a new well, we'll come out and take a free test for you. The other side of it is when they, I've had guys show up with papers on the counter and they're not a most probable number. They're just failed. And I usually slide them right back and said, unless it comes from a sample tap and unless there's a number on it, I'm going to ignore it, because so many times we get fails and we go out and simply go to the sample tap. And again, the other day I was just sure it would be 1 and we came back with a 2 at the sample tap. I was wrong, but we had failed numerous times at the kitchen sink, and then we get something from the sample tap, doing a lot of, I've been in crowds where people laugh when they say, don't turn the lid upside down, but he's right, don't turn the lid upside down. It's huge. You open that bottle in the right environment and you actually see dust particles stick, and it's difficult to get a good test.
And I don't know that I've seen a lot of really bad codes or bad regulations in my experience, but I envision the bad regulation and bad code really would come back to enforceability. If you're going to write it, make sure you can enforce it. Make sure that the regulation is not overly complicated. Make sure it's attainable. Make sure it's something that people can do. Sometimes I have seen either a specification or codes that push you in a direction that just you can't accomplish. So really make sure it can be done and make sure that you can get everyone to follow the procedure.
I would kind of echo that. I guess kind of what David said there about the ones where sometimes the regulations hurt the good guys and are indifferent to the guys who don't do it right in the first place. I was talking about it over lunch with a coworker that we've been in situations where the homeowner is still supposed to follow the same rules and regulations that we're supposed to follow, and they've gone ahead and done stuff that blatantly, if I had gone and done that, the local health department would have been after my license. And they would have the state's attorney called and said that I can't do that. But they've gone out to this homeowner and basically told him that, well, you're not allowed to do that, but I can't touch you. And so the only thing that the health department's ever told me is, please give me a call when the well breaks and we'll come on out there and stand there with you and at least be able to try to talk to this guy and try to make him do what he has to do. But it's one of those things where he got away with it. Now the contractor, I got 2 or 3 contractors that are in my local area that do not follow any of the same rules that I follow. I've got one that actually has no license that drills water wells. And the health department's told me that because he has no license, they can't go after him. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting there going, so would you like my license back? And they don't have a good answer for that.
Sarah.
So just to go back to the technical documents on shock chlorinating, I know the one for Oregon is that Oregon Health Authority is pretty easy to find, but those weren't created for private wells. Those weren't created for homeowners to try to use to shock chlorinate their own system. So Mark brought up some good points that I didn't really think about when I'm giving recommendations, to domestic well people. It's different than when I normally do when I'm talking to public water system operators. And so I think just to take away from that is, most of those documents aren't created for homeowners to use. Even though that document actually says we allow people in Oregon who have a small public water system to use household bleach. Even though you said don't use household bleach. As long as they calculate it right and they're doing it appropriately. And these are people that have just taken like a small water system operator class. They're not operating a large system. They don't have any treatment. But we allow them, using this document to do this on their public water system.
It can work. It's just a question of does it
Right.
work? And there's just no way to know that when you recommend it.
Yeah, and you had a good point. Homeowners are even less educated, are not going to normally know how to do that. And so that was a good point on, don't encourage them to do it themselves and use household bleach. And
it comes down to when you're trying to hit certain amounts, like he's talking about, you're trying to hit a certain residual, that certain free amount that's going to do what it's supposed to do. A lot of that comes down to how much water do you have in the well, how deep the well is, and how much product you want to treat to it. So when you just tell somebody, or homeowner just goes out there, pours in whatever they do, they've got no idea how much they're putting in, what they're doing, and if they're even being effective or not. And they go and tell you, oh yeah, I've chlorinated 3 times, and they're they're ticked because they've got bad sample, and the reason is they're not doing it right and have no idea that they're not doing it right. No one's told them that. So that was kind of my point on that.
I just did a well assessment in northern Illinois last fall where the owner told me that the driller told him to put a cup of bleach down his well every month. So, yeah, Cliff. Oh, you're up next.
So I'm going to ask one more question along these lines, but I've answered hundreds and hundreds of well owner calls. My role is to try to educate well owners, and I see a real chasm between the many organizations that put out specific instructions on well disinfection for the well owner. But I also see the other side where there are probably many instances where the practicality of getting a contractor out to a well, particularly like if you have a flooding situation, where there's just only so many contractors to go around. I guess I'm wondering what people think about what is the most responsible advice that could be given to a well owner who wants to get their well disinfected as far as moving forward with that. In other words, if it's not going to be this is exactly how you do it, go ahead and try to do it yourself. What's the and every situation not be able to be addressed by a contractor? What would be the responsible thing to say? I have a thought on that, but I'm interested in what other people think. Because it's a real chasm there. There's a lot of this and there's a lot of that.
See, the real trick is understanding how the entire system works. So, and I'm sure these guys have seen it, you go and you immediately know which homeowners have been chlorinating their well because you can't get the pitless out, right? The thing's so corroded together, you basically have to yank the entire pitless adapter right off the casing in order to get the pump out of the well. There are good procedures out there. I mean, there's, talk about the Minnesota Department of Health's guidelines. Other states have similar printable guidelines, so it can be done. It's whether they're going to do step 1 through 20 or if they're going to do steps 1 through 17 and call it good. So I think, the responsible answer would be is like, if you have no other option, here's a place you can get instructions and make sure you go from very top to the very end, or else down the road you're going to either affect your well negatively, have issues with service, and cost yourself more money down the road.
There's a lot of well owners who can't afford or won't spend the money on a contractor. So the question becomes, is it better for them to do nothing or to try to do it themselves, right? And so at least what we do with our classes, we recommend a good procedure that we think works. And so they've got to have some wherewithal. I mean, when it comes down to it.
Yeah, the bleach thing, like everybody would agree, is not ideal. But you get in that situation, you're getting 30 phone calls because some little river valley just flooded, and flushing obviously is huge to begin with. Get rid of all the bad water that you can, but to me, if you get in that kind of situation, it's like you need to flush your well as long as you can. Some situations you got a 3-gallon a minute well and you tell them to flush it for, right away I say, run your hose for 4 hours. Well, you hang up the phone and realize that person can't. But, worst case scenario, I would turn around and say, hey, if you have no other resource, do the bleach, get on the list, get a contractor out there, but flush your well often and do what you have to. But again, you're back to opening up a system, and so it's just kind of a slippery slope.
Well, one thing too, you may still need to get a contractor involved because if you're talking floods or some sort of natural disaster like that, you may have particulate matter that got in there and other things that got in there. Went right to the bottom of the well, and the contractor's the only one who's going to have the tools to pull the pump, blow the well, brush and jet, do whatever it takes to clean that well properly. If you did get actual physical particles in there, most wells are required to have vents in the lid and things like that. Or, technically, if you've had a flood, who knows? You could have knocked the whole cap off. Things like that do happen. So you may still need to find contractors. We're valuable resources.
Annie.
I use in Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, some of the states I address. I use EPA's guidelines. They have 2 of them on the website, and one of them is well disinfection. The other one is a guideline for what to do after a flood. And being where I am in Tennessee, that has worked great because we have been flooded 3 times in 10 years. So with that, the well people that I'm working with presently, whenever we have bad results, they want to shock chlorinate or chlorinate their wells. I go out and assist them, walk them through it, and make sure that they've followed all the steps and try to stay there with them, because the drillers in Tennessee want to charge $3,000 to $5,000 to come out and clean a well. We can't get the drillers in Tennessee to come to the table to talk to us. They want to diagnose the water without all the critical tests. And we're having big issues in Tennessee, and I'd like to figure out a way to get the drillers to the table, but it's not working.
Sounds like I might be retiring in Tennessee.
I would be amazed if you can't get Lloyd Watson to come talk to you in Tennessee. There you go. Go look up Lloyd Watson.
Well, I'm in central,
Yeah.
most of my work's central Tennessee, and I don't know where he's located at.
I don't know specifically either, but
That I'm working with, doing the area that I'm working, refuses to work with us.
Okay, go ahead.
So just shifting the subject a little bit from testing and treatment all the way back to making land use decisions around the well, kind of protecting the water in the first place. And I'm curious how engaged as drillers you all are, and your colleagues, your competition, if you have any sense at all of actually talking to these well owners about the land use choices they're making around their well when they're pushing their tests at you and seeing fail over and over again, instead of treatment systems, instead of drilling new wells, how often you talk to them about just adjusting their land uses. And I guess it's a 2-part question, because I'm curious how engaged you think your industry might be in being engaged in that teaching about land use decisions around well, and if that you think that you're a receptive audience to participating in educational programs yourselves to help deliver those messages, because that's some of the stuff that we work with. We come from the land of no well regulations at all, so.
Pennsylvania?
Yes, Pennsylvania.
yeah, well, I recently talked a horse farm owner into moving their horse pen, because I told them that having the well in the middle of the horse pen was probably not the best place to have it located. So, I mean, you've got, it's kind of a tricky conversation to have, because number one, if they don't like the answers you give them, they're just going to find someone else who will give them the answers that they like. So I don't know that it necessarily falls under the contracting community to deliver that message, trying to educate what's happening, why it's, could negatively impact their water. I think those are the areas that I try to primarily focus on when talking to owners and what they're doing around their wells and what might be impacting.
You need to move. You'd like it here in Illinois, where he was just talking about the farm pens and things like that. They don't allow wells in farm pens anymore. You got to stay so many feet away from
Any new pen, any new well.
Any
There
new
are
well.
wells in
Existing
pens in
wells,
Illinois.
yes, if it's a new well. But you have to stay so many feet away from that. Now they're going by and saying that if it's a barn that may at some point in time hold horses or cattle, just because it has the capability now, they want you to stay so many feet away from that. So certain ones of my local health departments are now doing that. So there's a whole list of things that we have to look for, stay away from, make sure that's the first thing that when anybody calls me up, a homeowner, and says, well, how do you figure out where to put the well? What, do you come out and you witch it, or you do this yet? No, there's a whole list of things my health department says I can't do, and that usually tells me which 3 sides of your house that I can't go on, and that leads me to the one side I can go on. And then I got to ask other things like, well, okay, now where's you going to do geothermal? Are you putting that in? Are you putting this in? Usually by the time the septic, the geothermal, and I go in, we all take a different corner of the house and do a big triangle. So it's that's basically how you get to place a well. It's not. In Illinois, it's basically where you can't go first, and then that leaves you the small circle that you can go.
All right.
Speaking from the driller's perspective, how willing do you believe drillers would be to hand out a one-pager with information for the landowner on, or the well owner on maintenance and testing sources and land use options nearby and that sort of thing. Just being that outlet for the education, since they seem to go to you anyway.
You guys have that? You guys the one with the private checklist on the like the wellowner.org or whatever, like that, the little 3-page thing that.
No, that's wellowner.org is NGWA.
Okay, it's NGWA. They have an NGWA, if it's wellowner.org, they have an interesting, if it's what I'm thinking it is, they have an interesting 3-page pamphlet that actually talks about what the prospective well owner, the new well owner, what it is, what different parts of the well is. It gives you a checklist on things as to how to pick different good contractors in your area, and then also a little checklist on different maintenance items and things like that you should look for. Is your casing cracked? Is your cap still on? Is your conduit still attached? Is the ground around your well subsided? Is it holding water? Things that every year you should look at to make sure that these are items that basically is your own private entity and your own private water supply you should look at. We try to hand those out every time that we drill a new well, put them in the packet with the invoices and things like that as to here it is. This is basically something to look at every year so that you guys can monitor your own situation and be better informed.
Yeah, Iowa has the similar deal booklet. I mean, it's a lot of that too, how to pick a contractor and just kind of little things to look for. I mean, I know there's probably not as many booklets missing in the state as there are wells being drilled, but there's more and more of the absentee well owner of, the livestock building is so-and-so investor lives in town, owns the property and hires a well drilled, and he doesn't want to do anything but write the check for the livestock building when he's done and do the investment. So sometimes you don't really know who should be seeing it because he's going to throw it away, and the person operating the building, might not say that it falls into their category. But yeah, to me, from a business side of it, the liability of somebody having a paper that I can hand out, that's great. I mean, if there's information that didn't necessarily come from me but represents me and it helps me maintain professionalism and educate them, then I'd say, yeah, if you would write it, people will hand it out.
Yeah, I would say there's a willingness to do that, absolutely.
Kelsey,
So,
last one.
okay.
Last question.
Back to flooding, just because it's been happening in a couple states. Considering wells that could have good integrity, not missing caps or grouting issues, and it gets submerged, how much water would you think would be going down into the well? Because some of the drillers I've been talking to on the East Coast kind of say that these systems are sealed and that submerging it without integrity issues isn't as problematic as we think. So I was curious your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think every aquifer is a little bit different. I mean, I know these shallow alluvial aquifers, some of the river bottoms, I've sometimes seen before the flood comes, the well's running over. So sometimes there's an elevated water level going on. There might be times they're not taking on much water. But again, most of the time we're trying to, short of levees breaking and things like that, in Iowa our code would be our well termination has to be above the highest known flood. So, I mean, you drive into some of those areas and wonder what in the world, and that's usually why. I mean, I've got wells that are 10 foot tall up to the eave spout of the person's house, and you're sitting there saying, what's up with that? And normally, again, all these flood situations, the person that you're going out and chlorinating, my first suggestion is as soon as you get this dealt with, elevate your casing. I mean, it has to help. The downside is your neighbor's well next door that maybe is not grouted or maybe not elevated. It's an older well in a pit. It's back to you got to protect it everywhere, but every time it starts at the source if you can.
And I'd certainly say we run across a lot more wells that are properly constructed, but they haven't ever replaced the rubber seal, and it's 15 years old. So how sealed is it really? Mm-hmm. Most of them aren't. Who replaces the rubber seals on their well cap? Right?
Good point. Yeah.
No one does.
I would ask too, is the system on or off? Is it operating? If it can turn on and start pumping at that point in time, it's going to draw a vacuum. It's going to draw water into it no matter what you do. So if it's in a flooded situation and it's still operational, one of the first things I always tell my customers if they call me up and say my well's flooded is I tell them shut it off. I say shut it off, go buy bottled water, don't use it, wait till the flood subsides, then let's start using it, pump it out, and then let's see what we can. At that point in time, you just don't want to operate that system when it's got water over the top of it.
The cynical side of me would say that a flood is a perfect time to finally get around to servicing that well that you've been meaning to service for the last 10 years.
All right, we're at our break. So you have 15 minutes. We'll just start 5 minutes late, give everybody the full 15. So we'll be back at 3:35. Thank you, you guys. A great job.